Tonight on the Worldview Weekend Hour, part 3 in our series, Brainwashed America. It's a big word, dialectical materialism, but it's vital you understand what it means if you want to fully understand the mind war taking place in America as well as the cultural Marxist revolution. The Worldview Weekend Hour begins right now.
WVW-TV presents the Worldview Weekend Hour with Brannon and Howse. Whether the topic is law, science, government, economics, history, family, social issues, education, or theology, Brannon brings the issues of today into clear focus through the lens of a biblical worldview. And now, here is your host, Brannon Howse.
Good evening and welcome to the Worldview Weekend Hour, part 3 in our series on Brainwashed America. We're going to finish up where we left off last week with a little bit more on the F scale. Remember, the F scale was created in the late 1940s by some of the folks from the Frankfurt School, and the F stands for fascist. And the book that came out in 1950, Authoritarian Personality, well, it reads like the newspapers today. If you're a conservative, if you're a person that believes in right and wrong, you believe in God, you believe in absolute truth, you're not very open-minded or tolerant of liberalism, progressive ideas, socialism, Marxism, cultural Marxism, communism, redistribution of wealth, you might be a fascist. So you notice how that word's being thrown around today? Well, if you're a conservative or a Christian or believe in absolute truth, you're a Nazi or you're a fascist. Well, again, it was created by the folks from the cultural, it was really called the Marxist Institute that was in Germany, formed in 1923. They left Germany in 1933, made their way to America at the invitation of John Dewey. They were Marxist, but they couldn't call it that, so they called it political correctness. We know it today as cultural Marxism. Their goal was to change the culture, the values of the culture. And by changing the values of the culture and creating chaos, it would lead to people willing to embrace socialism, the redistribution of wealth to deal with the chaos. Bigger government, more progressive income tax system to deal with the chaos that they'd created by attacking the very worldview and foundational principles of our constitutional republic. So I want to look at a little bit more of that tonight and then move into talking about dialectical materialism. Now, don't let your eyes roll back in your head. It's a big phrase. It's big words, but it's important that you understand dialectical materialism if you want to understand the cultural Marxist revolution taking place in America today and the mind war. So we'll get to that tonight. And I've worked extremely hard to try to break down some of these things in terms that are relevant to what's happening in America and the world today, but also in a way that anyone, junior high student through adult, can understand. So Brainwashed America, part 3. Remember, we're on part 1 of a 10-step process I have been laying out for you. What I believe are 10 systematic steps for brainwashing. Now, I've come up with these 10 steps by studying the cultural Marxist and communist revolution of 1949 in China, as well as how the Chinese, the communists, were involved in brainwashing our POWs during the Korean War. From that, I've come up with 10 systematic steps I believe are imperative for the process of brainwashing. And I think they're being carried out here in America. Number 1, of course, is remove or discredit leaders that are principled, courageous, and people of convictions and morality. Remember last week we did talk about the Authoritarian Personality, this book from 1950. This is where we left off last week. The headline, The One Weird Trait That Predicts Whether You're a Trump Supporter, from Politico, January 17th, 2016. The article said authoritarianism is not new, untested concept in the American electorate, and since the rise of Nazi Germany has been one of the most widely studied ideas in social science. While its causes are still debated, the political behavior of authoritarians is not. Authoritarians obey. They rally to and follow strong leaders, and they respond aggressively to outsiders, especially when they feel threatened. From pledging to, quote, make America great again, end quote, by building a wall on the border, to promising to close mosques and ban Muslims from visiting the United States, Trump is playing directly to authoritarian inclinations. Political pollsters have missed this key component of Trump's support because they simply don't include questions about authoritarianism in their polls. In addition to the typical battery of demographic, horse race, thermometer scale, and policy questions, my poll asked a set of 4 simple survey questions that political scientists have employed since 1992 to measure inclination toward authoritarianism. These questions pertain to child rearing, whether it's more important for the voter to have a child who is respectful or independent, obedient or self-reliant, well-behaved or considerate, and well-mannered or curious. Respondents who picked the first option in each of these questions are strongly authoritarian. It is time for those who would appeal to our better angels to take his insurgency seriously and stop dismissing his supporters as a small band of the dispossessed. Trump support is firmly rooted in American authoritarianism, and once awakened, is a force to be reckoned with. That means it's also time for political pollsters to take authoritarianism seriously and begin measuring it in their polls, end quote. By the way, did you notice anything wrong with those survey questions? Again, they're trying to say that if you believe in right and wrong, absolute truth, certain things that have made America great, then you tend to be someone who gravitates toward an authoritarian personality. Remember, the F-scale test is really all about deciding who are conservatives and thus then labeling them as fascist or as Nazis. And is that going around today? Sure it is. How many of you knew it really comes from the Frankfurt School and their studies in the 40s, and then that book they published, a couple of them, in 1950. Well, here's another headline, Christian Post, March 12, 2016. Donald Trump supporters display authoritarian personality, psychologists say. The article says Mark Leary, professor of psychology and neuroscience at Duke University, told the Christian Post that traits which define authoritarian personality include, quote, rigid adherence to traditional values, the tendency to condemn, reject, and punish people who violate those values, and having a submissive, uncritical attitude toward powerful authorities who support and defend one's values and views, end quote. Quote, viewed in this way, many of the central messages of the Trump campaign would seem to appeal to such individuals, end quote, continued Leary. Well, there you go again, folks. Going after Trump supporters, that doesn't mean people support everything he does or everything about him personally, but if you support some of his policies, strong border, vetting Islamists coming into America, dealing with the national security crisis, dealing with our economy, then you might be leaning towards someone who you would follow that could be a potential fascist. Again, all about destroying leaders or people who follow leaders that have very set conservative ideas in relation to continuation of our constitutional republic. Remember who wrote the F-scale test? Avowed Marxist, who openly stated one of their goals was the destruction of the strong American male leader to replace our patriarchal society with a matriarchal society, destroy the American male, remove conservative leaders. And that's point 1 in our 10-point series on the systematic steps of brainwashing. You got to remove those strong, principled men of character and leadership out of the way, just as they moved away 5% of the leaders from the other POWs during the Korean War. Remember, they brought the prisoners of war in during the Korean War, and they sized up who were those that were religious, who were those that were leaders, and they were deemed reactionaries, and they were moved to reactionary camps. And that was 5%. It ended up being about 5% of the prisoner population. 5%. Again, last week we stated, think about that in regards to the leaders of America. If you can move 5 to 10% of the leaders out of the way in America, they could have a cultural Marxist revolution in America. And that's exactly what they aim to do. Look at what William E. Mayer wrote. Remember, he conducted a study on the prisoners of war from the Korean War for the military. And in November 27th, 1956, he said this, quote, now the weapon they used was decisively simple. Before they could put it into effect, they had to segregate leaders, which they did very simply by putting them into what was reactionary camps. They put into reactionary camps reactionaries, people who tried to be leaders, people who showed what the communists called poisonous individuals. People who try to be leaders, that's key, and people who showed what the communists called poisonous individuals. If you had the temerity to try to organize anything, off you went to the reactionary camp. You are obviously hopeless. Other reactionaries were people with a higher education who were considered automatically pretty reactionary unless they volunteered to cooperate, and some did. Notice what he says there. People who tried to be leaders, people who were thought to be poisonous individuals with poisonous ideas, people who tried to organize anything. Does that sound like any of you? Any of you try to be leaders? Do any of you have what progressives or socialists or Marxists would consider poisonous ideas? Have you had the temerity to try to organize anything in your local community or your state? Well, then you might be a reactionary. You might be someone prone to following a fascist. Well, look at this. Here is a press release that was put out by the U.S. Justice Department, October 26, 2017, by then Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And what was it about? It was about the IRS targeting who? Conservatives, Tea Party people, people promoting liberty and freedom and justice and small government. And here's what Attorney General Sessions released in his press release. Quote, "But it is now clear that during the last administration," that'd be the Obama administration, "the IRS began using inappropriate criteria to screen applications for 501c status. These criteria included names such as Tea Party, Patriots, or 912, or policy positions concerning government spending or taxes, education of the public, to, quote, make America a better place to live, end quote, or statements criticizing how the country was being run. It is also clear these criteria disproportionately impacted conservative groups." It goes on in the press release to say, "As a result of these criteria, the IRS transferred hundreds of applicants to a specifically designated group of IRS agents for additional levels of review, questioning, and delay. In many instances, the IRS then requested highly sensitive information from applicants, such as donor information that was not needed to make a determination of tax-exempt status. The IRS's use of these criteria as a basis for heightened scrutiny was wrong and should never have occurred. It is improper for the IRS to single out groups for different treatment based on their names or ideological positions. Any entitlement to tax exemption should be based on the activities of the organization and whether they fulfill requirements of the law, not the policy positions adopted by members or the name chosen to reflect those views," end quote. Well, again, what was the government doing? The government was being used by a cultural Marxist, I believe, Barack Obama, and his fifth column deep state agents within the government to try to stop or limit leaders. Remember now, that's exactly what William E. Mayer said was going on in the POW camp. Anyone that had the temerity to organize anything, anyone that was a leader, anyone that set out to teach someone or to stand up against something, they had to go. If they were religious, they had to go. They were moved off to a reactionary camp. Well, how many people today in America fall into that criteria? They're conservative. They're leaders. They want to be leaders. They have the temerity to organize something, to make a difference, to defend our way of life, our original form of government, a constitutional republic. And what do we see during the Obama administration? Even the U.S. Justice Department under a new administration and under then Attorney General Jeff Sessions saying the IRS was questioning these people in an improper manner and denying them the right to be 501c3 because of their worldview. This is exactly what Marxists do. They try to push aside and discourage and stop leaders that do not agree with their worldview. Well, this is exactly what we see coming from Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School. We've talked about him many times in previous broadcasts. Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School, who coined the phrase, make love, not war. Here's what he said in his 1965 paper, Repressive Tolerance. Quote, "They would include the withdrawal of toleration." What is he talking about here? He's talking about the need to be intolerant of conservatives. In other words, he's saying the conservatives, they're intolerant, but we're going to be more intolerant than they are. And we're going to put in policies that are even more intolerant of those people that we believe are intolerant conservatives. So this is the context of his quote. So in this 1965 paper, Repressive Tolerance, he says, quote, "They would include the withdrawal of toleration of speech and assembly from groups and movements which promote aggressive policies, armament, chauvinism, discrimination on the grounds of race and religion, or which oppose the extension of public services, social security, medical care, etc. Liberating tolerance, then, would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left. As to the scope of this tolerance and intolerance, it would extend to the stage of action, as well as of discussion and propaganda, of deed as well as word," end quote. Well, let's go back. What did he say? He said that if you don't agree with them when it comes to armament, if you're a chauvinist, if you discriminate on the grounds of race or religion, well, isn't that what we hear today? If you're for vetting people who come from Islamic nations, then you're a bigot. You're involved in xenophobia. You're afraid of immigrants. You're a bigot because you want to discriminate against the Islamists coming to America and whether or not they are really interested in assimilating, or are they here for jihadi purposes? Well, if you want to question that, then obviously you're discriminating based on the grounds of race and religion, and therefore you're a bigot. Maybe you're actually a fascist. Maybe you're actually a Nazi. So again, you could take a term like, well, they discriminate based on race and religion. Well, what do you mean by that? You know, that's a very important question. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by they discriminate based on race and religion? If you mean they want to look at people who are Islamist, who are from Arab nations, Middle Eastern nations, who are Islamists, then yes, we need to vet them to be careful who's coming here. That doesn't make you someone who is discriminating based on race and religion solely, but based on common sense of what it is their religion or ideology is teaching, and is it in accord with our form of government? Will they assimilate, or are they here to create harm? Nothing racist or bigoted about that, but you can portray it that way, and it certainly happens all the time. And if you don't agree with the expansion of government and the extension of public services, Social Security, medical care. So again, what's going to happen? You're going to be deprived of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. Now, we saw that happen to us at some of our conferences in April of 2018. 4 out of 5 of them were shut down. In April of 2018, when Antifa and Muslim Brotherhood and CARE-type groups, Marxist groups, the Gamaliel Network and others, a Marxist interfaith group, all worked to threaten and put phone calls into the hotel that we were told, and the news report said were threatening type phone calls. And the hotels were concerned about security and what might happen and the complaints they were getting from the community. So they shut us down. And we were deprived of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. And this is how the Marxists work. And this is, of course, a quote directly from Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School. That was the Marxist institute that came to America after 1933. So this is how they operate. And again, the goal is to do this so there are no leaders, no one who can organize, Because someone who organizes is generally a leader. So we have to stop them. We have to deprive them of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, to move those leaders out of the way. Well, my friends, let's talk about a code of conduct for men of character and leadership. Because out of the Korean War came this, the code of conduct. As I've told you in previous programs, our military and our government was so distressed by what happened to our American POWs during the Korean War, something they had not seen in wars previous, that something had to be done. Something had to be done to prepare those men so when they go to war, they are aware of what their duties and obligations are. Their duties and obligations related to character and leadership. And again, they had to be briefed on how they might be treated. Because many of those coming back from the Korean War who were prisoners of war said, if we had only known, we could have resisted, but we didn't know. And so our government conducted this large study, William E. Mayer being a part of it for the U.S. Army, and released his book. And this is the speech we've been quoting from 1956. And this is whence came the code of conduct for our military, because of what happened during the Korean War. Here's the speech from William E. Mayer, 1956 again. Quote, "We didn't find men dying trying to resist communism. We found a lot of men died, as a matter of fact. Out of every 10 men captured, approximately 4 died in captivity. 4 out of 10. 38% to be precise. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the highest death rate of Americans in any kind of captivity, in any prison, in any war since the American Revolution. But they didn't die, as we thought, because of mass executions or systematic starvation. It's true the diet wasn't good enough. The medical care was non-existent. These were contributing factors in every death in Korea. But the specific reasons why men died were disturbing ones. They died because of some failures and lack relative to the development of character, the development of loyalties, the development of leadership that you and I are responsible for, not the communist. We saw another kind of surrender in Korea. We saw a kind of psychological surrender that was fatal. There was a disease there that killed hundreds of American troops. which the medical service had no name for. So the prisoners named it. They called it give-up-itis. Doesn't sound like much. It was a disease of the passive, the dependent, the rather inadequate. The kid who was awfully insecure, who couldn't tolerate this being isolated from other soldiers or from his unit. The kid who cried himself to sleep at night. He talked about his mother a lot, who brooded, who threw down the dirty bowl of food, because even though it would keep you alive, it was dirty and he didn't like it. And he crawled up in a corner by himself and would pull his blanket over his head, and in 48 hours he was dead. Dead. Not starved to death. No physical disease present, just dead. Hundreds of Americans died in this fashion. They were not psychotic. They were not insane. They knew what they were doing. They made the most profound of all human surrenders. We've never seen it among 18 to 20-year-old adult males. Never surrender. Well, aren't we trying to teach perseverance? Aren't we trying to teach fighting against odds and obstacles? And is the Army or Navy really the place to teach this? Isn't this an old-fashioned American characteristic? It's in the code of conduct because not enough of these people exercised it. And here's the code of conduct. I advise you go in your spare time and look it up and read it and come to understand why this had to be written and why American military soldiers to this day are required to memorize it. Well, we continue in the speech by William E. Mayer. He said, and another point in the code of conduct says something about what we're doing with leadership. And it's the most blistering comment upon the quality of leadership among us. And I mean leadership at the foreman level, at the squad level, at the gun crew level, at the supermarket level. Because now the code of conduct finds it necessary to say to Americans, soldier, if you're captured by an enemy and you're the senior man, take command. And if you're not the senior man, support and back up the man who is. Because we tell them your life depends upon it. And it literally does. In combat or captivity, under any kind of stress. And yet authority seems to be in disrepute. And leadership is undertaken on the basis of popularity contest now. So something has to be done about leadership in the shop, in homes, in schools, in Boy Scouts. That's where it starts. My friends, what is he saying? I wanted again to take a lot of what these men, Edward Hunter, William E. Mayer, were writing and try to break it down into ways that we can understand and digest and remember, and also to fully grasp the seriousness and the warning that they are giving to Americans then and yet today. And I believe as I broke this down, this is what he is saying to us. Look at this. No leaders, no standards. No standards, no discipline. No discipline, no organization. No organization, no resistance. No resistance, no opposition. No opposition, then there's no hope. There's only surrender. And my friends, that's exactly why it's important that we as Americans, as well as those in the military, are people who are leaders, who have standards, who are disciplined, who organize, who resist, who are opposition, so we can have hope. Because otherwise, my friends, Americans in the military and Americans outside the military, without leaders, we will succumb. We will be easily taken. We will become prisoners in our own nation. And yet, my friends, as he said in that quote, and yet authority seems to be in disrepute, and leadership is undertaken on the basis of popularity contest now. My friends, a lot of people today are elected not because they're qualified, but simply because modern day media and the press make them into being what they are, and without that, they would never be elected. We've had many presidents prior to radio and prior to television that would have never been elected if there had been radio and television because of their appearance, because they didn't look just so. Yet they were men of character, men of resolve, men of discipline, had organizational skills, administration skills, had deep character, and they were qualified to run and our country was blessed to have them in those positions. But today, many people are not elected because they're strong leaders with character and integrity, but because they fit a pop culture theology and ideology that's an inch deep and a mile wide. Look at William E. Mayer went on to say, quote, "We know that the man who exercises discipline within the military establishment is the man who has the best chance of surviving in combat or in captivity. But discipline's a dirty word. Discipline somehow has become synonymous with abandoning your own self-respect, abandoning your individualism and becoming a helpless machine. The only kind of discipline that really exists and really works is an internalized system of values, a set of standards existing within the individual which characterize and guide his behavior, whether there is a cop or a shore patrolman standing there or not. And it's the kind of discipline we have to seek from people. This is the kind of discipline that makes individuals able to join a team, individuals able to respond to competent leadership, and individuals able to have the intestinal fortitude necessary to be leaders, to set limits, to administer punishment and reward. And that includes even to our children. And naturally, of course, this is where the problem mainly lies. Discipline is not taught when a kid is 18 years old. It's taught in homes and Sunday schools sometimes, in churches. It's taught partly in the military. It's taught mainly in the family. It's taught from the cradle onward, or it's not ever adequately taught at all. It's taught at a parent's knee, and even possibly across a parent's knee. It has to be taught throughout the educational process. And then he went on to say, so something has to be done about leadership in the shop, in homes, in schools, in Boy Scouts. That's where it starts. I wanted to read that again because, my friends, what have we done to the Boy Scouts? What are the institutions that has created leaders? What have the cultural Marxists done to the Boy Scouts? What have they done to this institution so that it will not create the kind of leaders of character and integrity that we need to continue a constitutional republic? They have destroyed such institutions. And remember, that is what is the goal, number 1 of 10 in brainwashing, to be sure to move aside, discredit, or never have leaders of character, conviction, and morality. And one of the institutions that William E. Mayer was saying we have to do this is the Boy Scouts. And yet, since 1956, when he gave this speech, what has happened to the Boy Scouts? Look at this headline, New York Daily News, May 3rd, 2018. Georgia gubernatorial candidate blasts politically correct bedwetters for ruining Boy Scouts. Quote, a Republican gubernatorial candidate in Georgia slammed the Boy Scouts of America and their upcoming shift in identity as the, quote, latest example of cultural rot, end quote, a day after the organization announced it would be dropping the word, quote, boy, end quote, from its name. Quote, political correctness is literally destroying our culture and institutions. Liberals tell us that masculinity is toxic and that girls can be boys and boys should no longer be boys, end quote. Former Senator Michael Williams said in a statement Thursday, quote, imagine the outcome of World War II if the greatest generation had been raised by these politically correct bedwetters, end quote. The former Trump for President Georgia co-chair praised the organization for helping, quote, turn boys into men, end quote. In decades past, but argued it, quote, caved to left-wing social engineers who want to remove the concept of male masculinity from society, end quote, in agreeing to go gender neutral. The nation's most popular boys club on Wednesday announced their flagship program for children 11 to 17 years old will be called, quote, Scouts BSA, end quote, beginning in February 2019. Its name has remained unchanged for more than 100 years, but the Scouts opted for a shift now that they will be allowing female participants. Quote, our great nation desperately needs more John Waynes and fewer pajama boys, end quote, Williams continued. Again, what is the goal? The destruction of the societies and institutions that make America great. To destroy the existing morality of the culture. Remember, that's what the cultural Marxists said. This is a new way of revolution, not with guns and bullets. We're going to attack the existing morality of the culture. We're going to go after the institutions of education and media and religion. And we're going to go after institutions like the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts. Anything that creates leaders, we must move the leaders out of the way. Here's what Herbert Marcuse said: one can rightfully speak of a cultural revolution since the protest is directed toward the whole cultural establishment, including the morality of existing society. There is one thing we can say with complete assurance. The traditional idea of revolution and the traditional strategy of revolution has ended. These ideas are old-fashioned. What we must undertake is a type of diffuse and dispersed disintegration of the system, end quote. And my friends, that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to destroy the morality of our culture, to attack the existing morality of the culture, and that will create the chaos. That's exactly what the former KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov said in 1983-84, didn't he? The three stages for a revolution the KGB set out to carry out in America: demoralize, destabilize, chaos, and then the new norm. The big government, the redistribution of wealth, the socialism that would be put in place to deal with the chaos and bring things under control. Demoralize, destabilize, chaos, and then normalize. And what are they using? The three institutions of education, media, and religion. Number 2 in our 10 points: entice the brainwashing subjects into questioning and doubting their foundational worldview, values, and convictions. Entice the brainwashing subjects into questioning and doubting their foundational worldview, values, and convictions. Here's what Edward Hunter said on March 13th, 1958, before the Committee on Un-American Activities. Let me remind you real quick who Edward Hunter is. He's the one that wrote many books on brainwashing. He was a journalist. He said that he worked for the Office of Strategic Services, a forerunner to I think the CIA. And he studied the communist revolution in China in 1949. He studied the communist revolution in China in 1949 and how the communists brainwashed the people of China to go along with their revolution, much like it's happening in America today. And that's the whole point we're making here in this series. What the communists did to our POWs during the Korean War, our American prisoners of war, and what the communists did to their own people in China in the 1949 revolution is what they're doing in America today to carry out a revolution. So that's a reminder of who Edward Hunter is. And here's what he said in 1958, quote, "I spent 30 years, a little bit more perhaps, in countries under various forms of communist pressure and attack. What I'm witnessing in America is not different from what I saw in those other countries. I am often referred to as someone who has made phenomenal predictions that proved correct on things to come. Actually, I have never made a prediction in my life. I've only predicted in the manner that one predicts the total of 4 after seeing the figures of 2 plus 2. I have been watching developments under communism in other parts of the world, and now I see exactly the same developments here in America. They include, first of all, the penetration of our leadership circles by softening up and creating a defeatist state of mind," end quote. Let's just stop right there. What are they doing? They're penetrating our circles of leaders, our leadership circles. They're going after those leaders. Isn't this interesting? Edward Hunter is saying the same thing William E. Mayer said, both of them studying 2 different groups and how the communists brainwash people. And they came up with the same conclusion, at least on this one. You've got to go after those leaders. You got to move them out of the way, or you got to co-opt them. So you penetrate and have a penetration of our leadership circles by softening up. What's another word for softening up? Conditioning. Before brainwashing can be ever successful, there has to be a conditioning or a softening up. That's that demoralizing. Demoralizing. You soften them up. You demoralize them. And that destables. So there's got to be a softening up or a conditioning, a demoralizing. And then a creating of a defeatist state of mind, letting people believe there's no hope. He goes on to say, quote, "This includes penetration of our educational circles by a similar state of mind. I see primarily, as part of this softening up process in America, the liquidation of our attitudes on what we used to recognize as right and wrong, what we used to accept as absolute moral standards. We now confuse moral standards with the sophistication of dialectical materialism, with a communist crackpot theology, which teaches that everything changes, or that what is right or wrong, good or bad, changes as well. So nothing they say is really good or bad. There is no such thing as truth or a lie. And any belief we actually held was simply our being unsophisticated. They don't say this in so many words, except to those who are already indoctrinated in communism. What they do say to the rest of us is to be objective. And then they twist that word objective into meaning what they mean by dialectical materialism. End quote. Isn't that interesting again? Just like William E. Mayer warned about the lack of leadership, the removing of the principles and ideologies that create men of character and citizens, both men and women and children of character, have been removed, and words have been redefined, and good and evil have now been turned upside down. What is good is now evil, and what is evil is now good. Both of them noticing the same thing, this moral relativism, this situational ethics, and going after leaders in our educational system. But notice he also said that people are told that they need to be objective. What's another word for that? Well, you need to be tolerant. You need to be open-minded. You need to consider all sides. You need to be objective. And then he says they twist that word into meaning dialectical materialism. Now that's a big word, dialectical materialism. And I don't want your eyes to roll back in your head and you to walk off now because I just used that word, because I'm going to break it down. One of the things that we do here is take very complex issues and we try to break them down so that anybody from junior high through adult can understand them. Many people have asked me over the years, as I'm now working on my 15th book, how is it that your radio show and your TV show and your books have sold as well as they have? And I think it's not because they're such wonderful books, but because we have endeavored and labored to take complex issues and put them down to a level that people can understand in context of the life they live, the world in which they live, their state, their city, their community. In other words, we oftentimes, as the old saying goes, need to concentrate on getting the hay out of the loft and onto the floor for the sheep. Getting the hay down out of the loft, down out of the rafters, and down on a floor where the sheep can reach it. And many people today run around wanting to sound very, very intelligent, and they like to use big words. They get degrees in philosophy, and then they go into worldview, and they want to teach a lot of philosophy and worldview. And many people all of a sudden find out that this really isn't that interesting. I don't know half the words he's using, and I certainly don't understand how it applies to today. And I saw this many years ago, and I endeavored to create an organization that sought to take what is complex and break it down into simple terms and make it relevant to what's going on today with these worldviews permeating our culture and our society and these centers of education and religion and media. And so words like communitarianism, big fancy word, just simply means, in one sense, socialism mixed with capitalism. For a third option or a third way, communitarianism, communism light. Socialism mixed with capitalism, communitarianism. Many other words we use, we break them down and make them simple for people to understand. Dialectical materialism is one of those words that if you tonight were to go to the internet and put in dialectical materialism and start reading an article on it, I would venture to guess about 95% of you or more within 5 minutes will quit. Within a few minutes, you would quit reading the article because the words being used, you'd have to stop and go look up those words to understand the words they're using to try to describe this topic of dialectical materialism. And many people that supposedly understand it can't even explain it well enough to someone else. And so what it takes in some cases, such as in this, is a lot of study and then to break it down so we can understand it. In fact, to be honest with you, sometimes I have to break this stuff down so I can understand it. In other words, I read these things and I think that is just a lot of big words. I still don't understand what it is they're trying to accomplish. I don't understand what it is they're trying to say. And then after I do finally understand it, and sometimes that requires an awful lot of work, I think to myself, well, why didn't someone just write an article saying that? It'd have been so much easier if they'd just written an article for lay people just saying what it is this is really all about. Well, dialectical materialism is one such topic. Like I said, you go search the internet and read a few articles on it and see if your eyes don't roll back in your head and you lose interest real quick. But it's vital you understand dialectical materialism. In fact, if you want to understand Karl Marx and Engels, his partner in writing the Communist Manifesto and promoting this concept in the 40s, the Communist Manifesto coming out in 1848, we have to understand dialectical materialism. So let's break it down in ways we can understand. Here's how I've done it. These are bullet points that I've come up with that I believe describe what I have studied, that being dialectical materialism. Number one, all that exists is the natural or material world. So first, by materialism, what we mean is all that exists is the material world. Two, the world evolved, man evolved, thus society evolves, morals evolve. You notice what's going on here? Evolution. Darwinian evolution is being applied not only to creation, but now it's being applied to society, to morals, to institutions. Pretty soon you're going to see how that evolutionary process has been applied to marriage. Marriage is no longer one man and one woman. You can now be someone of the same sex. Pretty soon it's going to be adults with children. Hard to think, but that's where we're going. And in fact, that's what Alfred Kinsey, one of the 21 radicals ruling America from the grave, as I deal with in my book, Grave Influence, was talking about. Alfred Kinsey. Hollywood's made him a hero, made a movie about him. Why is this happening? Because these people believe in biological evolution, but then they believe not only is society has the material world evolved, but everything evolves. Everything is always changing and evolving. Now, your secular humanists, or those who only believe in the material world or the natural world, this is what they believe, and you're dead and you're over. Those who also believe in a spiritual world then also bring Darwinian evolution, and the natural world, the material world is evolving, and they apply it to the spiritual realm too. And we all need to spiritually evolve, like good karma, bad karma, reincarnation. So whether they're someone who believes in the natural world, like a secular humanist, and you die and that's it, well, they apply it up to the point they die. If there's someone like a cosmic humanist or New Ager, well, they'll apply it to the natural world, but they'll also apply it to the spiritual world. So both sides can do this. Karl Marx, however, applied it only to the natural world. As a secular humanist, he believed when you died, that was it. It was over. All that existed was the material world. But as the material world evolved and was changing, so does society, so do values, so do institutions. And so if we're really making progress, we can't stay stuck in the old Judeo-Christian way of marriage between one man and one woman. We have to continue evolving and advancing. And so now they want to redefine marriage. Well, there's many ways or many reasons they want to do that. One is to break up the institution of the family, which is the incubator for passing on biblical worldview in a constitutional republic. But some of it is because they also want to say, look how we're evolving, we're moving beyond just being in a static situation. So they're going to start redefining everything away from what God's intention was. And isn't that what Satan's goal is? To destroy the institutions God created, the purpose of family government, civil government, church government. So dialectical materialism says all that exists is the natural or material world. The world evolved, man evolves, society evolves, morals evolve. Society and morals evolve through continuous conflict of opposing ideas that synthesize through a dialectical process. So that's why it's called dialectical materialism. Remember the Hegelian dialectical process coming from George Hegel, one of the people that I talk about in the book Grave Influence? He was one of the 4 people that influenced the Frankfurt School. Remember us talking about the Frankfurt School and who influenced them? Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, Friedrich Nietzsche, and George Hegel. Hegel greatly influenced the Frankfurt School, but George Hegel, the German philosopher, also greatly influenced Karl Marx. And Hegel believed in thesis and antithesis, idea and opposite idea, and they conflict, and they fight, and then they synthesize together to produce a third option, and then the process starts all over. Well, if you take socialism and the opposite, capitalism, and you let them fight and merge together, what do you have? What's really going on in America today? Socialism mixed with capitalism in America, for what's also called communitarianism, or third way, or public-private partnerships, or many common good, many names. But you see, it takes that opposite, those opposites fighting to bring about the change. And that comes from George Hegel. So this is going on in the material world. Opposites in the material world are fighting each other so we can have a third option, and the evolution process in the natural world can continue in all areas. Family, marriage, economic, values, government, law, all of it. This has to occur, this dialectical conflict in the material world. So society and morals evolve through conflicts. Continuous conflict of opposing ideas that synthesize through a dialectical process. Matter, they believe, preceded the mind. This is, of course, Darwinian evolution. Matter preceded the mind. You see, as a biblical creationist, I believe in the beginning God, right? As a biblical creationist, I believe in the beginning God. As an evolutionist, a secular humanist and evolutionist, they believe in the beginning matter. In the beginning, matter. Matter preceded the mind. We believe in the beginning God. God spoke things into being, and He created man, and He gave man a mind. A mind. The brain, but don't confuse the brain and the mind. I can show you a brain in an autopsy. I can't show you the mind. The mind is connected to the heart and the soul. It's that which will live forever. See, we believe in the beginning God, and then God created. And God created among them man, who He gave a mind. God precedes mind, the mind of man, right? God created the mind of man. They believe, as secular humanists, in the beginning, matter. There was just matter. And somehow these cells and different things, and of course they don't tell you who created those things, so something is created out of nothing. But they teach that, and all of a sudden this matter, and out of this matter then, billions and billions and billions and billions of mutations and different things happened, and boom, you have more matter, and pretty soon all of these mutations, supposedly good mutations, billions and billions, voila, you have creation, a creation of something, an organism, and then you have the evolution process, and you now have man, the mind. But it started with matter and led to mind. And it all happened out naturalistically, out of random chance. That's what they teach. Matter preceded the mind, Darwinian evolution. The mind is the brain, and thoughts are a product of the material world. In other words, nothing that we think is tied to the moral law being created and placed on our heart and mind by God. Nothing that we think comes from God. Nothing that we think has any kind of spiritual meaning. Nothing that we think has any ultimate real purpose in life, because this is all really just an accident. Nothing that we have comes from the fact that God has placed His a reflection of His character and nature on our heart and mind through the moral law or the Ten Commandments, which Romans 1, 2, and 3 all talk about. No. The mind is the brain. They don't believe in the mind, the soul, and the spirit. They just mean the mind is the brain. The mind is the brain, and thoughts are a product of the material world. Dialectical materialism also says there are no absolute truths, as there is a constant change. There are no absolute truths, as there is constant change. They believe that Judeo-Christian values will give way to collective and situational values. They believe family will give way to communal living. They believe marriage will give way to communal wives. By the way, that's exactly what Karl Marx taught in the Communist Manifesto. Go read it. Communal wives, the breaking down of the family. Everything must be changing constantly, right? And of course, once you start breaking down marriage and family and communal wives, pretty soon you're on to what? You're moving into the homosexual area. Dialectical materialism teaches man is a product of his environment that is always changing. So man is simply a product of his environment. Man is not bad. Man doesn't do bad things. Man does not have a sin nature. Man is, because that'd be spiritual, man is simply a product of his environment. Put him in a good environment and he'll basically be a good person. Create the good, perfect, just society and he'll be pretty much a good guy. So man is a product of his environment that is always changing. Man's material state determines his values and behavior and thus creates society. Man's material state determines his values and behavior and thus creates society. The state should own or control the means of production for the common good. Capitalism will give way to socialism. Nationalism will give way to globalism. Nation states will give way to world government. Evolution and revolution is a never-ending process. Evolution and revolution is a never-ending process. In other words, folks, this process just keeps going over and over and over again. So even once they reach what they think is the perfect state, it's going to keep going again because we're in an evolutionary cycle. Let me try to explain it this way in closing. You have a foundation and you have a house, right? You have a foundation and then you have the house. The foundation of America and the house is America. So think that the house is America and we have a foundation in America, right? So think of this. What has been the foundation for America? Christianity and capitalism largely, right? A Judeo-Christian ethic. And our foundation as our constitutional republic, as William Blackstone defined it, was what? What the divine is ruled on, we don't rule against. So our foundation in America has been Christianity and capitalism. And that foundation then influenced how our nation operated. And those within that nation, within our home, within our nation, within our state, we had laws, right? We have law and science and economics and history and government and family and social issues and religion and education. And all of those practices are disciplines of life, are the working out of our worldview in those areas. But the foundation of that is what? Christianity and capitalism. And that's how America has run. Now look at this. The foundation enables the house, and the house maintains the foundation. The foundation enables the house, and the house maintains the foundation. In other words, how we live out in the area of law, science, economics, history, government, family, social issues, and religion and education, as we maintain that with a Christian worldview, we keep the foundation of our nation going. But if we don't have the foundation being Christianity and capitalism, then we don't have the proper working out of those disciplines of law, science, economics, history, government, family, social issues, religion, and education. So the foundation enables the house, and the house maintains the foundation. Now look at this one. Internal contradictions compromise the foundation and result in a revolution within the house and change the values and conduct of its occupants. Let me say that again. This is why they must attack the existing morality of the culture, folks. Internal contradictions compromise the foundation. Is that going on in America? Are they compromising the foundation of our nation today? Christianity and capitalism? Yes. What did Karl Marx say? My object in life is to dethrone God, destroy capitalism. So internal contradictions compromise the foundation and result in a revolution within the house or within the nation and change the values and the conduct of its occupants. In other words, now we're not applying a biblical worldview to the areas of law, science, economics, history, government, family, social issues, religion, and education. Now we're applying a secular humanist worldview or a cultural Marxist worldview or a postmodern worldview. And so that's why we have to have this conflict. Now, what does this do? Thus creating a new foundation and thus a new house with the process starting all over again. With the process starting all over again. Look at this in closing. A foundation of dialectical materialism enables material conditions that create the morality of a society. Thus, they say, the ownership of the means of production must be controlled by the state so material wealth can be redistributed in an equitable manner that creates a just and fair society for the benefit of all. Now, this is what they teach, the cultural Marxists. They believe a foundation of dialectical materialism, meaning opposites fighting each other, no absolute truth, everything is evolving, no moral absolutes, redefining marriage, redefining family, redefining the purpose of government. A foundation of dialectical materialism enables material conditions that create the morality of a society. In other words, if you have enough people, have enough income, that'll change their morality. In other words, you won't have crime and people stealing if you give them money. They're not involved in crime because they like to be involved in crime. They're involved in crime because they're broke. And if you take care of their poverty, they won't be involved in crime anymore. In other words, they're involved in crime because of their poverty. Or maybe it's because they're in poverty because of their character and nature. Maybe they're in poverty because of their lack of morality. Maybe they're involved in poverty because of their moral relativism. Maybe they're involved in poverty because they don't respect the confines of marriage and have children outside of marriage. Maybe they have poverty because they're lazy or irresponsible. Some it's because they're suffering the consequences of someone else's sin. But you see what they're saying is no. Poverty is because there's an unjust society of exploitation by capitalists. They're involved in crimes, not because they're sinful people, because they don't believe in sin, they don't believe in the spiritual realm. They're involved in crime because they're poor. And the reason they're poor is because there's because there's exploitation by the capitalists and the Christians. Therefore, if you give them enough material wealth, that will change their values. You change their values, that will change society. That's why they say a foundation of dialectical materialism enables material conditions, or it creates material conditions that creates the morality of a society. So we can simply change society for good if we just get rid of what causes people to be bad. And it's not their sin nature that's causing them to be bad. It's their lack of certain things, their lack of materialism, their lack of material natural things. So we have to redistribute the wealth, and then we can have a utopia. Thus, the ownership of the means of production, they teach, must be controlled by the state so material wealth can be redistributed in an equitable manner that creates a just and fair society for the benefit of all. Morals and values, they teach, are social constructs because there's no such thing as absolute truth for all people, places, and times. These are things we've just created, and largely created by the Christians to control people. So they believe America is a construct of Christianity and capitalism for the purpose of controlling and exploiting workers for the benefit of the upper class. So because there's no absolute truth, because things are always evolving and changing, there is no absolute truth. Therefore, all these absolute truths we're always trying to push on people, they've just been created by the capitalists and the Christians to exploit people. Perfect example, America's founding fathers. They were white European men with Judeo-Christian worldview that exploited the underclass for their own gain, as evidenced through the practice of slavery. Case closed. See how evil white Christian capitalists are? But of course, they're not telling you the truth about slavery, now are you? Now, my friends, this is how you have dialectical materialism. And when you understand what that's really all about, to destroy the foundation and change the way the house operates, change the foundation of the country and how we operate our house, now you see how when they fight with us and they bring in revolutionaries and those who disrupt the foundation, disrupt the disciplines of our law, science, economics, history, family, social issues, and education, then it changes the whole foundation and then changes the worldview, the values, the conduct of the people. And this is how you carry out with Marx the revolution in a nation. Very simply, I know you're going to have to go over this again, but if you can understand this, dialectical materialism and this continuous process, you'll understand what it is they're trying to do. Now, what's again really interesting is once they achieve what they think is the perfect state, it's not going to hang around because things are always evolving and continuing on. But they don't tell you that now, do they? Now, I hope you appreciate what we're trying to do here each and every night as we bring you this class. And if you do appreciate it, well, we need your support. And the bottom line is we do need your support. And it doesn't matter how much you give. Thank you for making a tax-deductible contribution at wvwfoundation.com, wvwfoundation.com. You'll find our mailing address there. Now, we get this online. Some of you are going to need to watch this whole section again on dialectical materialism. But go through these charts I've made, these graphs I've made, and come to understand it. And if you do, you'll understand what is happening in our nation and why, based on the worldview of Karl Marx. But again, to do all this and have the time to do it and the cost of distributing it and the bandwidth and the post-editing and the equipment takes resources. And your partnership with us provides us with that. And you can make a tax-deductible contribution at wvwfoundation.com. Again, you'll find our mailing address there as well. If you'd like to join our Situation Room, we've archived years and years of radio shows and TV shows, thousands of them, at situationroom.net. You can join for as little as $9.99 a month, $99 a year. And the list goes on for 2-year and 3-year memberships. Situationroom.net, situationroom.net. Well, Lord willing, we look forward to next Sunday night in our next series on Brainwashed America, Part 4. Thank you so much for watching. Till next week, I'm Brannon Howse. Take care.